Recently, through one of my wife's friends, I stumbled across something that flipped my whole world upside down. I found out she had been unfaithful for the past 20 years. That was it for me. I decided our marriage had to end. My wife, Rachel, 44, and I, 43, have been married for 2 decades. We've known each other since high school, back when she was a senior and I was a junior. We started off as just kids in love, the kind of relationship that survived distance and time. When she left for college, I was still finishing high school. Her first 2 years away were tough, but I stayed back, did a year at community college, and then transferred to a university in the same city as her. From that point on, we were practically glued at the hip. We moved in together and never looked back. By the time I graduated, we tied the knot that summer. If you had asked me, I'd have told you our marriage was strong, solid. But just a few weeks ago, I filed for divorce. Turns out, Rachel hadn't exactly been faithful during those 2 years we were apart. It all unraveled right after Christmas. We had a small get-together at our place with a few of Rachel's college friends. It was one of those relaxed evenings where everyone lounged around the dining table, laughing and digging up old memories. Somewhere between dessert and pouring more wine, Rachel casually brought up how we'd known each other since high school. She left out the part where we'd been dating since then, just said we met back in those days. I didn't think much of it until one of her old roommates, Claire, chimed in. "Wow, it's crazy you two made it through college together," Claire said with a smile. "I mean, considering how wild those years were." I chuckled and joked back. I'm not so sure Rachel was as wild as I was. That's when things shifted. Claire opened her mouth to say something else, but Rachel cut her off, right there. "I don't want to get into that," Rachel said quickly. Her voice was light, but I caught the flicker of nerves in her eyes. My stomach dropped. Something about the way she shut Claire down didn't sit right with me. I felt this itch in the back of my mind, like I was missing part of the picture. I smiled through the rest of the evening, but I was already turning things over in my head. As we were leaving, one of Rachel's other friends, Lisa, lingered behind and quietly pulled me aside. "Hey, maybe you should talk to Rachel," she whispered. "About college. Just really talk." That car ride home felt longer than usual. The air between Rachel and me was heavy. I glanced over at her and casually asked, "So, what was that all about? With Claire?" Rachel shrugged like it was nothing. "Oh, it's nothing really. Just old stuff that doesn't matter." But it did matter. I could feel it. "Rachel, come on." I pressed gently. "If there's something I need to know, you should just tell me." She waved it off. "Honestly, you're making a bigger deal out of this than it is." I wanted to believe her, but deep down I knew better. Her dismissive attitude only made my gut churn more. When we got home, I made it clear I wasn't going to just brush this off. I told Rachel I'd be staying at my brother Mike's place until she was ready to be honest about what really went down during her college years. The next day, she showed up at his doorstep, visibly rattled. She fidgeted with her hands, something she always did when she was nervous. Finally, after what felt like forever, she admitted to sleeping with multiple men during her first 2 years away at college. She tried to spin it like it wasn't a big deal, said we were long distance and she figured our high school relationship wouldn't last anyway. It felt like someone knocked the air right out of me. I stood there, staring at her, not sure if I wanted to scream or just walk away. I couldn't let it go. I pushed her for more details, even though part of me dreaded hearing the truth. That's when she dropped the hammer. There were at least 10 guys. At least 3 of them were guys she'd introduced to me during those weekends I'd driven down to visit her. One of them she still talked to regularly. I couldn't even process it all. Anger, sadness, betrayal. It was a storm of everything I never wanted to feel. I told her right there, plain and simple, I wanted a divorce. I wasn't going to pretend things could ever go back to the way they were. First thing after New Year's, on January 2nd, I filed the papers. Rachel kept trying to downplay it, making it seem like I was overreacting. But this wasn't just about cheating. It was the lying, the years of deception, the absolute disregard for our marriage. Her family, and even some of my own, started chiming in, telling me not to throw away 20 years over a few mistakes. They kept preaching about forgiveness, about how we'd been together for so long, and I shouldn't just let it all fall apart. But this wasn't just a few mistakes. This was a pattern Years of disrespect right in front of my face. She brought those men into our lives, introduced them like they were her friends, and let me shake their hands without blinking an eye. I couldn't unsee that. Our kids, Emma and Jack, are 17 and 19. They're practically grown. I know they'll understand. They deserve to see what it looks like when someone stands up for their self-worth. Some things can't be forgiven. And for me, this was one of them. They've always seen Rachel and me as this rock-solid, loving couple, and I can only hope they understand why I'm making this decision. It's about holding on to the little bit of self-respect I have left. Honestly, I feel like I'm losing my grip with the sheer number of people telling me to just brush aside years of betrayal and decades of lies. Everywhere I go, someone is whispering that I should forgive, forget, and patch things up. They say I'm being unreasonable, that I need to focus on the good years we had together. But how can I possibly do that? Every single memory feels stained now. I can't think about our vacations, anniversaries, or even simple nights at home without feeling the weight of what she did behind my back. This isn't just about the cheating. It's the lies that followed. The fact that she stayed friends with some of those men. How am I supposed to trust her again? How do I even look at her the same way after this? And the way she brushed me off when I confronted her, like my feelings didn't matter at all. I keep asking myself if I'm blowing things out of proportion. Maybe I'm being too harsh, too unforgiving. But then I replay that moment in my head, her confession, the weight of it crashing down on me, the rage, the heartbreak. And I remember the countless nights I lay awake, wondering how she could introduce me to those guys, acting like they were just friends, acting like nothing was wrong. There's no getting over that. No flipping a switch and pretending like the past didn't happen. This isn't about punishing her. It's about drawing a line and standing up for myself. Some betrayals cut too deep to ignore. I don't think I'm wrong for leaving. I'm fighting for my dignity, for my right to not be lied to and manipulated. It's not revenge. It's just facing reality. Some boundaries, once crossed, can't be walked back. I'm writing this because Rachel and a few of her friends have been saying it's normal to sleep with other people during a long-distance relationship. That I'm the weird one for not doing the same. Honestly, I feel like I'm being gaslit here. I needed to get some outside perspective because I feel like I'm losing my sense of what's reasonable. Since our state has a mandatory waiting period before the divorce is finalized, I figured I'd try to get my head straight first. I've seen some folks online agree that it's not unheard of to hook up with others during long-distance relationships, but they seem to be the exception. During those 2 years Rachel was in college, I drove down to see her a couple of weekends every month. We were 3 hours apart, not across the country. It's not like we went months without seeing each other. I thought we were making it work. Apparently, I was the only one who thought that way. The 3 guys I met while Rachel was in college weren't introduced in any formal way. It was just casual, random faces at parties or social gatherings. The whole boyfriend angle never really came up, so to this day, I have no clue if they knew she was in a relationship. One of those guys is still part of our circle because he ended up marrying one of Rachel's close friends from college. He hasn't been some shady figure lurking in the background. He's someone we've both seen and spoken to regularly for years. After I learned about Rachel's affairs, I reached out to him. I guess I was desperate to make sense of it all. He seemed genuinely shocked and said he had no idea we were dating back then. Out of respect for me, he blocked Rachel on social media after our conversation. I appreciated that gesture, even if it didn't change the past. Some people have wondered why Rachel's college roommates never pieced things together at our wedding. The thing is, our wedding wasn't a grand affair. We had a small ceremony with just family down in Texas. A few months later, we threw a bigger party for friends on the East Coast. It wasn't your typical wedding with speeches and slideshows about how we met and our love story. We kept things simple, more like a celebration than a traditional reception. Because of that, her friends just assumed we started dating later, during the year we both lived in the same city. That misunderstanding explains why none of them ever raised an eyebrow or questioned the timeline. For a while, I was open to trying to fix things. I thought maybe therapy could help, or that, with enough effort, we could patch up the damage. I really believed that if Rachel was willing to meet me halfway, we might have a chance. But every time I brought it up, she brushed it aside. She kept insisting that what happened wasn't a big deal. According to her, sleeping with other people during a long-distance relationship was normal, and I was the one being unreasonable. The only time she showed any flicker of regret was when I started moving forward with the divorce. For a brief moment, she seemed like she actually wanted to work things out, but it didn't last. Within a week, she snapped right back to the same dismissive attitude, telling me I was overreacting, that I needed to get over it. That back and forth has left me feeling like I'm losing my mind. It seems crystal clear to me that what she did was a major betrayal, but the way Rachel talks about it, you'd think I was making this all up. I feel gaslit, like she's trying to rewrite the narrative and convince me that I'm imagining the hurt and betrayal. I've tried to explain how deeply her infidelity cut me, hoping she'd acknowledge it and take responsibility. But instead, she downplays it, treating my pain as if it's some over-the-top reaction to nothing. It's like she's rewritten the rules of our marriage and expects me to just fall in line. I can't. I won't. This constant invalidation of my emotions is driving me up the wall. I feel like I'm being pulled into some twisted reality where I'm supposed to question everything I know to be true. Rachel's refusal to grasp the seriousness of her actions, and worse, her efforts to brush off infidelity as normal, has only driven a deeper wedge between us. It's not just the cheating, it's the fact that she refuses to see why this hurts so much, why I feel completely betrayed. At this point, I have to look out for myself. I can't stay in a marriage where my emotions are disregarded and my trust feels shattered beyond repair. Rachel's lack of genuine remorse and her stubborn insistence that I'm somehow the unreasonable one make it impossible for me to see any future for us. This isn't me being dramatic. It's me standing up for the kind of relationship I deserve, one rooted in honesty and respect. I've had a few people ask if I'm planning on getting a paternity test, but the answer is no. I'm not doing it unless Emma or Jack ever ask for one themselves. I have zero doubts about being their father. Even if some tests someday said otherwise, it wouldn't change a thing. I love those kids more than life itself, and no matter what Rachel did, they'll always be my children until the day I take my last breath. When Rachel and I were dating, there was never any confusion about whether we were exclusive. Dating was just different back then. 20 years ago, exclusivity was assumed unless you explicitly said otherwise. There wasn't this whole casual dating or open relationship vibe you see today. If you were with someone, you were with them. Before Rachel left for college, we had a serious, emotional conversation about making long-distance work. It wasn't easy, but she was the one pushing for us to stay together. I still remember her joking that if I cheated, her dad would personally track me down. That wasn't just a throwaway comment. It meant something. It showed me how much she wanted this relationship to survive. One thing that really cemented how serious we were was my senior prom. Rachel couldn't make it because of school, so I floated the idea of going with a friend, strictly platonic. Rachel hated the thought of it. She got visibly upset, and I knew how important it was for her to feel like I was hers, even if she wasn't there. In the end, I skipped prom entirely. Instead, I spent the night hanging out with Rachel over the phone. That wasn't just some high school fling. That was a relationship built on trust and commitment. Sure, maybe we never said the word exclusive out loud, but everything about how we acted said it for us. We were a team. Fidelity was the unspoken rule, plain and simple. The other day, I circled back with a friend who initially told me to have a heart-to-heart with Rachel. I guess I was hoping for some clarity. Instead, she dropped a bombshell. According to her, 10 guys might actually be on the lower end of the scale. And apparently, there was even a pregnancy scare during those college years, something I'd never heard a word about. Hearing that knocked the wind out of me. I can't wrap my head around how much of our relationship was a lie. And yet, Rachel still insists I'm the one making too much of this. I don't know how to make sense of it anymore. But I do know this, I deserve better. Honestly, the number of guys isn't the issue that eats at me. What really stings is that Rachel seems incapable of grasping why her actions were wrong and why I feel so deeply hurt by it all. If she showed even a shred of genuine desire to make things right, maybe we'd be in a different place. But that hasn't happened. Throughout our talks, she brushed off my feelings like they were some overblown reaction to what she believes was normal, acceptable behavior. She never truly expressed regret. At least, not until I made it crystal clear that I was filing for divorce. Only then did she switch gears, and even then, her reaction felt more like panic over the fallout than remorse over what she did. Her defensiveness and anger were telling. It wasn't about us. It was about what she stood to lose. By the time she suggested trying to fix things, I had already signed with a lawyer and filed the paperwork. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't about repairing the relationship. It was pure damage control. The whole experience reinforced what I already felt in my gut. Rachel just doesn't understand the depth of what she's done. It's not just the cheating. It's the continuous disregard for my emotions, the years of deception, and the indifference to the very foundation of our marriage. How do you rebuild something with someone who doesn't see the cracks in the first place? At this point, I'm confident we can handle co-parenting. The kids are older, and I've been saving for their college expenses for years. Custody won't be a battle, and financially, we're both in solid positions. Therapy is still on the table, but not for salvaging the marriage. More for learning how to co-parent effectively and close this chapter with as little collateral damage as possible. I've taken the first real steps towards separation. My lawyer drafted an intent to separate and sent it to Rachel via certified mail. It's not an official divorce filing yet, but more of a heads-up, giving her space to hire her own lawyer if she feels the need to contest it. I expect the process to stretch out over several months. For now, I'm staying at my brother Mike's place while I figure out a long-term living situation. The timeline unfolded fast. The dinner with her friends was on the 26th. I left that night, crashing at Mike's to clear my head and give Rachel time to reflect. We had several conversations over the next 4 or 5 days, but the more we talked, the clearer it became. Rachel didn't think she'd done anything wrong. If she had shown the slightest bit of remorse or empathy, I might have paused and reconsidered. But her indifference made the path forward obvious. I found a divorce lawyer, and we quickly filled out the separation paperwork. It went out that same day. Technically, we aren't divorced yet, and I'm not sure if our state even recognizes formal separation. But none of that really matters. What matters is that I've drawn the line and started walking. Let me unpack what I learned about Rachel's college years. After several counseling sessions and a few uncomfortable talks with 2 of her former roommates, it became clear that even they suspected something was off back then. They admitted they'd picked up on red flags but chose to stay out of it. Rachel had apparently spun a story for them, saying that we both had our wild times in college but managed to work through it before getting married. Her version of events painted this picture of mutual understanding and growth, so they didn't think there was a reason to bring anything up. The roommate who pulled me aside at dinner was the one who felt the most uneasy. She said it never sat right with her that Rachel had never told me about any of it. She felt I deserved the truth. As for the men Rachel was involved with, I've since found out that some of those introductions weren't deliberate. The guys weren't paraded in front of me. They just happened to be at the same parties or events. Still, that doesn't change what happened. And it doesn't change how Rachel handled it. Some things just can't be smoothed over with time or explanations. One of the men Rachel slept with ended up dating, and eventually marrying, one of our mutual friends from college. He's a guy she kept in contact with over the years. During counseling, Rachel initially tried to shift the blame onto me, suggesting that I had somehow pushed her into those situations. But eventually, she admitted it was wrong. Back when I visited her during college, Rachel often planned for us to stay in her dorm room or hang out privately. But I wanted to experience the full college atmosphere, parties, social events, the things I'd missed out on during high school and community college. I never imagined those parties would put me face to face with guys she had been with. Rachel said she never intended for me to meet them, but they were often at the same events, and she felt awkward avoiding them. I still see that as incredibly disrespectful, but I guess it's marginally better than if she had introduced me to them knowingly. This entire situation feels like a tangled mess of half-truths and omissions, which makes processing it so much harder. Her friends suspected but stayed quiet, and Rachel managed to keep this facade going for years. Most of our therapy has revolved around this core issue: why I view her infidelity as a major betrayal, while she initially didn't. Rachel rationalized her actions by saying none of these men were in committed relationships with her. According to her, they were one-night stands or casual hookups, not romantic entanglements. In her eyes, that somehow made it less significant. Her words, not mine. But from my perspective, the nature of those encounters didn't matter. We never agreed that sleeping with other people was acceptable. In fact, Rachel actively discouraged me from doing the same. The double standard couldn't be more obvious, and that only deepened the betrayal. After 2 therapy sessions, and from what I understand, some tough conversations with her friends, Rachel finally started to see things differently. She admitted that her actions had broken the trust and foundation of our relationship. This shared understanding has shifted the tone of our conversations. We've gone from heated arguments to more open, honest discussions. It's not a cure-all, but it gives me some hope for our future as co-parents. The idea of salvaging the marriage feels out of reach, but if we can communicate honestly and respectfully, we can at least establish a healthier foundation for co-parenting. That's critical for the kids and for the long haul. Now, let me explain why I'm 100% set on divorce. 2 key things came to light that left no doubt in my mind that this marriage needed to end. First, about 10 years ago, Rachel and I hit a rough patch. We went nearly 2 years without any intimacy. Rachel said our physical relationship had become stale, so I tried to bring some excitement into it. Nothing extreme, just light role play and a few novelty store items to spice things up. I wanted to show her I was willing to make an effort. What happened next made it clear that effort wasn't mutual. However, it turned out Rachel was fixated on certain intimate experiences from her college years. Experiences she refuses to fully discuss. She wanted me to recreate those moments, but when I tried, it left her feeling awkward and guilty. She admitted it reminded her of the men she had been with during that time. The fact that she insists these experiences were meaningless, yet they continue to affect our marriage, tells me they held far more weight than she's willing to acknowledge. The second revelation was even harder to stomach. Rachel confessed to flirting with coworkers during business trips after the pandemic restrictions eased. She swore nothing physical happened, but it escalated to the point where she went on a date with one of her male colleagues. For me, that was the breaking point. These 2 revelations shattered any remaining trust one had left. The first showed me that despite her claims, the past wasn't as distant as she wanted me to believe. The second made it clear that she was still willing to test boundaries, even after everything we had been through. Combined, they left no room for hope in salvaging the marriage. We've since told our kids about the divorce. Rachel and I sat down with them and explained that it stemmed from decisions made during college, decisions that we hadn't been able to fully move past. During the conversation, our 19-year-old, who's currently in college, asked if I had ever been unfaithful while Rachel was away at school. The question caught Rachel by surprise. But to her credit, she admitted to our children that she was the one who had cheated. We agreed to leave it at that. No further details. There's no need for our kids to shoulder the full weight of our past. I reassured them that, despite the separation, both Rachel and I are fully committed to being present for them. I emphasized that we are continuing therapy, not to save the marriage, but to ensure the divorce is handled in the healthiest way possible for our family. I made sure they understood that if they ever needed to talk, whether to us, a therapist, or someone else, they would have my full support. I want them to feel safe expressing their emotions and to know that their well-being is a top priority. Rachel and I have also started meeting with a mediator to discuss the next steps in the divorce process. Barring any unexpected changes, it looks like we'll be able to part ways amicably. We're fortunate to be financially stable, free from significant debt, and with our children older, custody isn't a major concern. For now, the focus is on keeping things as smooth and peaceful as possible, for the kids and for ourselves. The past few months have been tough, but I'm managing. To be fair, my 19-year-old daughter has had her own struggles with relationships. She's been hurt by boyfriends who either cheated or left her abruptly for someone else. Given her experiences, I understand why she initially suspected I might have been the one who cheated. It didn't help that I was the one who left the house. In her eyes, seeing her father leave the family home might have looked like an admission of guilt. Her past heartbreaks have shaped her outlook, making it easier for her to assume the worst. When cheating was brought up, Rachel was upfront with the kids and made it clear that she was the one who had been unfaithful. Honestly, I'm not too worried about controlling the narrative. From what I can tell, Rachel hasn't said anything negative about me to the kids. Given her recent admissions about flirting, cheating, and her willingness to proceed with an amicable divorce after just 6 weeks and 3 counseling sessions, I can see she was more ready to move on than I was. Her readiness has made the logistical side of the divorce easier, but it stings to see her walking away from a 20-year marriage with what seems like minimal difficulty. I'm fairly certain she's already thinking about dating again. During our session with the divorce mediator, she pointedly mentioned that we're still legally married until the divorce is finalized, and that any infidelity before then could jeopardize our amicable settlement. The irony wasn't lost on me, considering our divorce stems from her infidelity in the first place. Rachel was visibly irritated by the topic, which only reinforced my suspicion that my continued presence in the guest room might be cramping her plans. At the end of the day, I'm just trying to come to terms with the end of our marriage. I've been attending therapy on my own in addition to our couple sessions, and it's helped me cope. I'm preparing myself for the inevitable day I run into the coworker she briefly dated, but I'm hopeful that I'll have my own place before the divorce is finalized. If everything goes smoothly with the mediator, we should be officially divorced by summer. By then, I'll have moved out, and Rachel can date whoever she wants. Rachel and I have officially finalized our divorce. It's done. We managed to have an uncontested, amicable divorce with minimal disagreements. Our lawyers worked together through mediation to draft the plan, and a judge signed off on it a few weeks ago. The process, for the most part, was straightforward. The only real complication involved our 17-year-old son. He was adamant about staying with me, largely due to his strained relationship with Rachel. At first, Rachel resisted and was ready to challenge the uncontested divorce. But our son made it clear. Either she gave him time to rebuild their relationship at his own pace, or she risked him cutting ties completely when he turned 18. His approach was harsh, but it prompted Rachel to back down. In the end, we agreed that I would have primary physical custody until his birthday later this year. Throughout this, I've encouraged my son to stay open to rebuilding his relationship with Rachel. Despite everything that happened before he was born, she loved and cared for him for 17 years. Recently, I've noticed him spending more time with her, which gives me hope that they'll find a way to mend things. This divorce has been difficult for all of us, but I believe with time, they'll reconnect. As for the division of assets, we split our retirement funds and investments 50-50. Rachel kept the house. She always liked it more than I did, along with most of the furnishings. I walked away with my share of the savings and the freedom to start fresh. It's been a long road, but I'm optimistic about what lies ahead. To balance things out, Rachel took out a mortgage to pay me back for half of the equity and half of the estimated replacement value of the furniture. Most of our other belongings were fairly easy to divide. She kept her car, I kept mine, and we split personal items like my music gear and her hobby equipment, along with clothing and other personal effects. For anything harder to split, we agreed to sell and divide the profits evenly. Thankfully, we had already documented most of our valuable items and electronics for an insurance rider we added to our policy a few years ago, which made the process surprisingly smooth. Things have been going well for me personally. Both of my kids spend most of their time at my place, and our relationship remains close, something that was my biggest concern throughout the divorce. I'm incredibly relieved and grateful that our bond has stayed strong. I've moved into a new house that I genuinely love, a place that feels like the fresh start I needed. In a nod to what might be my midlife crisis, I traded in the old minivan for a sleek Lexus LC 550, and I have to admit, it's brought more joy than I expected. On another positive note, a woman at work, someone from a different department, so there's no professional overlap, invited me out for coffee. I was upfront with her and explained that I'm not quite ready to date just yet. She was understanding and said she'd happily take a rain check for when I felt ready. The invitation was a pleasant surprise. She's incredibly smart, has a fantastic sense of humor, and since our roles at work are distant, there's no awkwardness. Rachel and I are still attending couples counseling, but now the focus is on closure and ensuring we can co-parent effectively. These sessions have been invaluable for keeping the communication lines open and fostering a healthy, positive environment despite the circumstances. However, they've also reinforced that divorce was the right call. Through our conversations, It became clear that Rachel began dating almost immediately after the divorce process started. The love we once shared had faded long before the paperwork was filed. I'm fairly certain the coworker she always insisted was just a friend even dropped her off at one of our recent sessions. Oddly enough, this realization didn't upset me. If anything, it confirmed that I was ready to move on too. Healing from the betrayal will take time, but I can confidently say I'm making progress. I've cried more in the past 4 months than in the last 20 years combined, but for the past month, I've genuinely felt good about myself, probably for the first time in a long while. I'm embracing my independence, keeping busy helping my 17-year-old prepare for college in the fall, and looking forward to eventually taking that coffee rain check with someone who makes me smile. This journey through divorce has taught me the importance of honest communication. Looking back, I wish Rachel and I had been more transparent with each other from the start. Perhaps some of the pain could have been avoided. It's a lesson I'll carry forward into future relationships, whether romantic or otherwise. But more importantly, I've discovered the resilience within myself to rebuild and move forward. Despite the heartache, I'm finding joy again, and that feels like progress.